Welcome to KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're telling those stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. I'm Ruth Bondigas. KC Cares is also proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Huffman Foundation. As we emerge from this past year or so of restrictions due to the COVID pandemic, business organizations are on the fast track to bring people back together for common causes and concerns. And one Kansas City organization that has been doing that all along is the Mid-America LGBT Chamber of Commerce. And we're so glad to welcome back Suzanne Wheeler, who's the executive director. So good to see you.
Thanks so much, Ruth. It's so great to be here. I'm really excited about it.
Even though we're in our safe virtual spaces, we have to tell that to everybody. We don't want anybody to think that we're taking advantage, although we're vaccinated, right?
Yes.
We're all those good things. So let's catch up about what you all have been doing. And, let's start for some of our audience who maybe is not so familiar with your organization, what your mission is, what your focus is.
Okay, wonderful. Well, the Mid America LGBT Chamber of Commerce is an 8-year-old chamber of commerce in Kansas City. Um, and our mission is basically to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion across the workforce in Kansas City and also support LGBTQ plus businesses here in Kansas City. Ultimately, we're all about making our economy a much more vibrant and inclusive economy.
I can't believe you're 8 years old,
I know.
so to speak.
Only 8 years old. It's interesting because our chamber has come a very long way in those 8 years. We originally just started more as a networking organization among LGBT businesses and some of the supporting corporate sponsors. And we have really moved more into a services based chamber and have started doing a lot more work in the advocacy realm around business and LGBT advocacy. Just we're in a major growth period right now.
Well, that's phenomenal. And you have now been with the chamber
I've
three
been with the
years,
chamber almost 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
I started in August and then August of 2019, and I had a couple of months to get my feet underneath me before I took over completely full time. We had a contractor before that doing the executive director job. And I took over officially in October as the executive director. And then, of course, in March of 2020, the world changed.
The world changed. Well, we'll go to that P word in just a moment, but I wanted to go back. You are the first full-time, I think, executive director for the chamber.
Yes, I am our first full-time employee of the chamber and the first full-time executive director in the chamber. So
From an organizational standpoint, what was that transition like? Other organizations may be going through something like that, so your wisdom is valued.
it made an enormous difference, I believe, for the chamber. And irrespective of who's in there, it allowed a person to be full time focused on everything that's going on in the chamber rather than before it was a part time contractor. So he didn't have that full focus on the chamber all of the time. Did a great job in taking really building a great foundation for the chamber, but to be able to do the work and provide the services that were needed for our members, we had to have somebody engaged all of the time with the chamber. And one of the things that it's helped us do is really build a lot stronger relationships across the city too, with other organizations and strategic partners that even allow us to bring more services to our members.
Well, one thing I think that's interesting about the LGBT chamber is, unlike some of the other chambers that are very focused in a particular city or community, you have that huge reach across this whole region. Can you share with us a little bit what that has been like and maybe some examples of how you're doing that?
Well, originally we were started to be a regional chamber. We are one of right now 60 affiliate chambers of the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, NGLCC. And uh, right now, where we're positioned, we cover all of Western Missouri, Kansas, Northern Oklahoma, and Nebraska. Our closest chambers to us are Denver, Des Moines, and North Texas. And Denver and Des Moines just hired their first full time uh, uh, folks, so they're kind of stepping up in the space too. So we're excited about that. But that's kind of where we are regionally. The challenge that we have regionally with just one employee is it's very difficult for one person to split time between the Kansas City metro, Columbia, Wichita, Topeka, Omaha, Lincoln, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City, and really serve all of those members. So that's a major challenge for our chamber. But we do a lot of advocacy in those areas, and we do provide a lot of services for those areas in those areas. And the pandemic has kind of allowed us to spread our wings a little bit in that area too.
Well, I love to hear that. I coined probably from somewhere else, but pandemic positives. So that's one of your pandemic positives. Again, I don't want to lose that, but I want to make sure our audience understands totally the full breadth and depth of what you all are doing. So making those connections, how do you go about that? I guess it does bring us back to the PP word, positive pandemic points, 3 Ps there. How do you do that when you are one paid staff? And that's a tremendous geographic spread.
A lot of it really is about personal introductions in between organizations, getting to know somebody, and then having somebody like yourself, Ruth, go, you know, you need to meet X, Y, and Z. And that is how we've built that out. Now, I'm one person and I'm full time. However, everything that happens in our chamber, really all of the programming and all of the great things going on in our chamber, has originated with our volunteers. And I also work for an amazing board of 17 members who literally dedicate hundreds of hours a month to this chamber. So it's just not one person. We've got a lot of folks in the chamber working towards our mission.
But you mentioned that the pandemic has had its positive uh, uh, in allowing you to connect. So, how have you been able to do that as a chamber during this quasi lockdown, now slowly loosening year or so?
A lot of it has been, and again, it's a pandemic positive, where one of the things the pandemic caused the community to come together and coalesce on different issues. And I was able to meet people that typically I wouldn't have met as quickly as I did in my position. So we got to know one another online, working on projects, working around how do we do a closure and not and not completely destroy our businesses within the community, and how do we reopen, and how do we get the assistance to our businesses out. All of those questions, there were a lot of organizations working together on, a lot of different chambers. And one of the things that the pandemic has done in the chamber community, I believe, and I'm only in it 2 years, but when I first came in, it felt like there was this feel of competition among organizations, and that there was going to be scarcity. Um, and now, one of the things the pandemic has done has kind of erased that. We've seen that it takes all of us to be able to completely raise up the community, and that what we thought was scarce is not there. Those resources to be able to run our organizations, go, cover all of us, take care of all of us. And quite frankly, I've become very good friends with a lot of the other chamber executives in the area.
That's fabulous. I'd love to hear that. It does seem like maybe, I hope we don't revert. And now that things are opening up, everybody will go back to their little silos, but maybe we'll keep that interconnectedness that the Zoomosphere, as you and I chatted about, has given us the ability to do. Let's talk a little bit about how things have run for you during this pandemic. How have you been able to keep your organization on track, so to speak?
Well, it was interesting. When the pandemic started, we actually had a meeting 4 days before Kansas City, Missouri announced its shutdown. We were sitting at the executive committee of our board, and myself had dinner at Regaza, and we were talking about what are we going to do, how are we going to handle this and get ahead of it. And we had actually built kind of a plan around, okay, we can shift this online, we're going to have to shut down this program, shut down this program. How do we put our events online? How do we continue to do the fundraising that we do? How do we think it's going to impact our membership levels? We already had all of those discussions, so we were prepped and ready to go. I even actually had gone in before they announced a shutdown and bought a Zoom package for the chamber. So we were already kind of spun up on that. And I was lucky in my previous position. I worked at UMKC, and I worked in the area of high impact HIV prevention and helping train the national workforce all the way, the workforce all the way across the country on how to best do that. So I had a good background in how we shift training online and how we build teams online and do things just like we're doing now online, because that's how all of our teams work there. Um, so we were able to make that pivot fairly quickly. Ooh, I use that word. That's a word that everybody used at the beginning of the pandemic, and now everybody's going, "Ooh, I don't like that word anymore." So we
It's a
were.
good P. It's a good P word.
It is. It is. But we were able to make that shift and be able to go online without an enormous amount of impact, and to allow, and in a way where our members still felt engaged. Um, One of the other things that we did with a lot of our volunteers, we were worried about losing that volunteer engagement piece. We really put an emphasis on our committees, and getting those committees together and doing work, um, and building other programs. And we've actually stood up 4 different programs during the pandemic that will transition to hybrid, where we'll be online and in person, um, as we start to open back up. So those have been and that again, all member driven. So that's how we kept our members engaged and working and doing those things.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to dive into all the things that the LGBT Chamber is doing and how you can get involved. We're back speaking with Suzanne Wheeler, who's the executive director, the first full time executive director of the Mid America LGBT Chamber of Commerce. And we should remind folks, if they're interested in knowing more, your website is
It's www.midamerica.lgbt.org.
perfect, perfect. So these programs that we were speaking about a minute ago, were these started during the pandemic, brand new programs?
We actually had two programs, our Emerge, which is our Rising Professionals program, which was started by some graduates from our Metzler program, which is our leadership program. They wanted a training and networking space for those. I use younger not in an age way, but in a career way, where younger professionals can get together, talk about where they're at, and kind of away from the stress of being in a room with their bosses at like our business to business events and our coffee connections and those types of things. And they wanted to do professional development training with that too. So they put that program together. They had one meeting in February. They did it at City Year downtown, and very successful. We had about 35 folks there at our initial meeting, and then the pandemic hit, and they had to transition that online. What happened with that program is really, really cool because I mentioned earlier our region. We have young professionals from all over this region and even some outside of the region that don't have an LGBT chamber in their area. And they may or may not be LGBT. They may be allied, not just allied. Allies are the most important thing in the world. But they're LGBT or allies, and they're coming into this group, and it's grown. It's amazing. So again, we're working that hybrid piece so we don't lose that regional reach with our folks, and everybody feels connected. And then maybe figuring out how to put together a once a year get together. So those folks who've seen one another in 2D all of a sudden feel like they're part of the group.
I'm not going to use a P word. I'm going to say a change, possibly. I'm going to change tax for a second. You had mentioned allies or allied. You do not have to be someone who is LGBT or identifies to be part of your chamber. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. Well over 60% of our chamber right now are allied businesses. And when you look at our membership, the representatives of those members, they're pretty much tracking right along those same numbers. And it's really great because I always tell people, when you hear about LGBTQ plus issues from me, you always hear from the lens of, well, she has a vested interest in this issue. So, but when somebody hears from an ally who may be cisgender, heterosexual, and they're saying this issue is important, all of a sudden it starts driving that home a little bit more. And we found that to be, that very effective. And that's one of the reasons why allies are so important in moving the equity bar forward.
What's membership like right now for you? And did you see any change over October 2019, let's say, when you joined, and now we're into, the spring, summer of this year in 2021?
It was interesting. In the chamber industry as a whole, we thought the sky was going to fall in on us. We were really worried. um, that a lot of folks would leave the chamber based on the recession of 2008 2009. The chamber industry really suffered through that recession, and we thought the same thing was going to happen with the pandemic. Fortunately, what we did see is those industries that weren't overly impacted by the pandemic stepped up to support their chambers. And we have a lot of members who are in the service and performing arts industry. And they said, I can't pay right now. And our board had made a conscious decision that we would carry those folks through the pandemic because they needed the services that we were providing. And they've been there for us during the good times. Now it was time for us to be there during the bad times. And so we've seen a lot of those folks come back. We saw a lot of those folks when they were getting, their assistants coming back and saying, I can now afford to pay. My employees are getting paid, so I can now afford to pay my chamber dues. And we're really appreciative. So we're going to up our membership. Or we had corporate partners step up and say, we want to pay more. That way you can cover these folks. So it was very good. Right now, we did take a little bit of a dip. We dipped down at one time. We were at a low close to 350 members, and right now we're back up a little bit over 400 members.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, we're the fifth largest LGBT chamber in the nation, which says a lot about Kansas City, in my opinion.
That is amazing. I don't know if people say that again so people will really get that. That's a big, big deal.
We are the fifth largest LGBT chamber in the nation, which says so much about Kansas City. Because when I left in Kansas City in 1984 to go to college and go to the military, I had no idea that we would see the Kansas City that we see today. So it's just amazing, and I love being a part of this community.
I'm going to give you that opportunity to give that pitch. So why would somebody organizationally or individually want to join your chamber? What is the big grab?
Well, really, really, the big grab is it goes back to our mission. It's improving that culture, and in enticing individuals to, number one, want to stay in our area. One of the things, and especially right now, we hear everything about the labor market. Um, and for me, I can't fathom and get my head around why a business would want to shut itself off to over 6% of the population, because you've got, you know, parents and friends and family. You get into the rule of sevens of everybody knows everybody. Why would you not want to show yourself as an inclusive, progressive organization that embraces individuals on the skills that they're bringing to the job rather than the identities that they're bringing to that job? So that's a big piece. And when you're a member of the chamber, um, that we help build that culture, and it also shows that you have that aspirational support for that mission.
You mentioned 6% of the population. Is that the population identifies as LGBT?
It's the population identifying as LGBT in Kansas. It's a little bit in Kansas and Missouri. It's a little bit lower. Um, in the Kansas City area, it's around 6%.
Okay.
Uh, in Kansas and Missouri, it's showing between 4 and 4.5%. And those numbers are hard to chase because we've never asked them in a census. So we're relying on independent polling data for those numbers. But the one thing that we do know is that millennials and Generation Z are identifying as, in different, or in sexual orientation other than heterosexual, and in gender identities other than cisgender at a much higher rate than our generations. So it gets to that point where you're going, why are you going to close yourself off to a growing demographic rather than rather than embracing the way the world's moving?
All right, we're going to do a quick rapid fire because we only have a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
Give us those top programs and just a brief description. We talked about Emerge, which is for younger professionals, not by age, but by career track. Rapid fire, what else?
We have a great program, Chamber Speaks. Chamber Speaks is kind of a Toastmasters light program. It is for our business members who want to improve, or for our members who want to improve their business communications, how to do presentations, how to do interviews like this, all of those types of things. And it's been enormously popular. We've got another program called Masterminds Presents. That is focused on small business issues. We just did one yesterday, and we had 3 legal experts talking about all of the legal things you need to think about as you're building your business or starting your business. So that's a fabulous program. We have the C. Stephen Metzler leadership program, which what that program is, it's the only program we have that is completely focused on the LGBT community. It matches up senior LGBTQ business leaders with up and coming business leaders. And we see great growth out of that. Our former Mayor Kay Barnes teaches our Kay Barnes Leadership Series for us. A lot of people don't realize that she is an adult education person and has been teaching leadership for decades now. And Kay has graciously teaches that class for us. Trying to come through think of some of the other programs. You got me going, and I don't have a list up in front of me, so I know I'm going to forget.
No, that's okay. What I would tell our audience is that the Chamber has a very robust series of programs and events, and I would encourage our audience to go visit the website again
at www.midamerica.lgbt.org.
Great organization. Suzanne, we're so glad to have had you back. We're so glad you survived and even thrived during the pandemic, took you in some newer directions, but it sounds like you are just making the best of all of it. And we wish you continued success and hope you'll come back and share some of those successes with us.
Oh, we always love to come back and talk with you, Ruth. You're just amazing, and your audience is fabulous.
Thank you for listening to Casey Cares. We're Kansas City's nonprofit voice, and we're produced by a nonprofit, Charitable Communications. We're proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. To be a guest on Casey Cares or underwriting opportunities, please visit our website, kccaresonline.org. And you can spread the love. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio, and on Instagram at Casey Cares Online. And catch us on ESPN 1510 AM and 94.5 FM at 8 o'clock Saturday mornings. Thank you for listening to Casey Cares.